Dear friends, today the Indian Supreme Court delivered a verdict on the disputed matter of Babri Mosque slash Ram Temple. The Indian Supreme Court weighed all the evidences submitted before them and found that there were some sort of architectural remains of a building, ancient building, which was not Islamic. So they opted for the possibility of a temple being there before the Babri Mosque. But the Indian Supreme Court couldn't reach conclusively that that uh, temple or building or architectural remains, whatever that was a Ram temple. The Hindus believe that those remains are the remains of an ancient Ram temple. Ram is considered to be God by a part of Hindus, and on the other hand, many of the Hindus do not consider Ram even to be a god. India rivers Ram, yes, but at the same time, some river Ram as a king who ruled India thousands of years ago. It is rather a myth, even to many of the Hindus. Nevertheless, the Indian government is trying to unite Hindus under the banner of Ram, the king, who at least was a king, according to most of the Hindus. It has become a symbol of India's Hindutva movement, which is nothing but an ultra-nationalist fascist movement. So it was a question of prestige and a question of political stunt for the Narendra Modi government. The slogan Jai Sri Ram has become the present day Hi Hitler for India. That's why this slogan is used widespread by many of the ultra-nationalist fanatic Hindus to carry out attacks against religious minorities, especially against Muslims and Christians in India. The Ram Temple claim, in fact, got momentum in 1853 when the then Hindu ultra-nationalist group claimed that there was a Ram Temple before the Babri Mosque was built. During the 18th and 19th centuries, many of the mosques came under attack in India, claiming that those mosques were built at the site of Indian temples. Yes, it is true that many of the invading Muslim attackers destroyed or some sort of a insulted the Hindu feelings, and many of the Hindu Purohits were even tortured, or even they were banished from their lands by many of the atrocious invaders. But that doesn't mean the 500-year rule of Muslims depict the picture of atrocious Muslim rules. Rather, Muslim rulers in many ways built many temples and renovated many temples. Muslim ruler, Mughal emperor Humayun was the first ruler in Indian history to outlaw and to discourage Satidaho system. Satidaho means where the Hindu widows were sent to the fire along with their dead husbands. The Muslim rulers also allowed many of the Hindu temples to remain, which in modern understanding do not uphold civilized manner. For example, many of the Hindu temples depict group sex, sexes with animals and everything, and also sex with children on the walls and the terracotta statues. So those temples are still standing for thousands of years, which also prove the tolerance of Muslim rulers during their rule of India. Muslim rulers also paved the ways for Muslim saints to preach Islam at a time when Hindus were believing in caste system, and as still 170 million Hindus remain untouchables even to their fellow Hindus of higher caste. Muslim rulers also paved the ways for Muslim preachers who did away with caste systems and allowed the Indians to become Muslims so that they could stand shoulder to shoulder at the mosques. So Muslims were trying to preach brotherhood in India, and the relationships, especially amongst the common mass Muslims and Hindus, remained friendly. Although there were troubles amongst rulers of various religions throughout Indian history. You must not forget that the Muslim rulers ruled India at a time where there were caste systems. Hindu women didn't get any inheritance at all. Hindus were divided into various untouchables. Hindu disabled were not allowed to inherit. Hindu women were not allowed to marry again after the death of their husbands. Hindu husbands could marry multiple times. Men and women were being sacrificed to the deities because there were Kumari Bolis, etc. So Islam also saved many of the Hindus from being tortured, abused, and even killed to death by their fellow Hindus. Muslims also paved ways for Christians to preach religion in the subcontinent. We must not forget all this. But there is a tendency to vilify Muslims, and this verdict will also make situation harder for not only for Muslims but for all religious minorities, and eventually to force them to accept India into a Hindu state. Well, that's how I see, and that's obviously we are seeing signs of those. But there is a tendency for the Hindutva leaders of today to divide and rule and to use religious excuses to keep India under the stronghold of Hindu fanatics. That's the main thing. The Ram temple could never be proven, that the temple that remains of the Ram temple. Even the followers of Jaina religion and the followers of Buddha religion also lay claim to the site that they had their temples and their religious sites at the very place. The dangerous side of this whole verdict is this allows belief to rule over evidence, because the court rather allowed a belief to prevail over a community. That's the dangerous thing. Muslims are minority there, but significant minority. But Hindus are in majority there. And there is a rise of ultra-nationalist Hindutva movement. And Indian economy is going down. And at this juncture of time, the Indian Supreme Court's verdict to allow the sentiment, the emotional sentiment, and also the concocted belief of a baseless claim to prevail over property rights is wrong. The Babri Mosque has been there for hundreds of years. That's the fact. The Muslims are running that place for hundreds of years. That's the facts. And if you dig into the structural grounds of all temples and churches in India, you will find, obviously, remains, or there's a possibility of finding remains of non-Islamic, non-Christian archaeological remains there, because obviously India has been a country where Abrahamic religion is rather new. Even Buddhism is new compared to Hinduism. Sikhism is new compared to Hinduism. So if you probably dig under the grounds of the Golden Temple of the Sikhs, probably you will find remains of thousands of years old of architecture remains which were not Sikh. So what you're going to do? Tear down all the buildings, all the structures? This excuse is going to be used by ultra-nationalist fascists to tear down many more non-Hindu structures in India. They're also going to use this to take over lands of Muslims. with the pretext of this god had something to do with that land and that god had something to do with that land, because there are many gods who are worshipped in India. So how are you going to go by it? The Indian Supreme Court also ordered the Indian government to allow a certain land, a certain amount of land to Muslims to build their mosques elsewhere. I don't think that's good enough to reach a compromising situation. Rather, the Supreme Court could have made a verdict where they could have said that archaeological evidences didn't provide enough ground to reach a verdict that the temple was Ram temple. But there is another problem. Hindu religion is a religion which is based on some issues which are they consider to be sources. For example, Sriti, Sruti, Riti. So Hindu religion is not necessarily a religion based on scriptures. They believe customs as the source of their faith as well. So this faith issue, which has become a faith issue rather, the claim to Ram temple, surfaced for 200 years and it has become part of their belief now, although no such claim was ever made before 200 years. So this has set a bad precedence, and unfortunately the overwhelming majority of Hindus are happy about it, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has rather encouraged to be patriot regardless of their Ram or Rahim issues. But that's not true, but that's rather deceptive, because one of the primary election campaign for Narendra Modi government was to build a Ram temple there. In 1992, on the 6th of December, many Muslims were killed and the Indian government failed to protect the Muslims when the Hindus took over the Babri Mosque site forcibly and tore down that archaeological landmark. They didn't wait for a court verdict. So this will rather pave ways for Hindu fanatics to take over many more mosques, many more churches in future, and eventually wait for a court verdict to allow their belief to prevail. That's the dangerous side of it. And I think this is going to be used, this verdict is going to be used for future belief-based verdicts, even to stop Muslims from eating beef, or to stop Christians from eating beef, and from stopping Christians and Muslims from preaching their faith. So I believe that this verdict has taken one step forward to turning India into an ultra-nationalist, Hindutva-ruled government. And it is going to turn India into another fascist religious country. And this will also pave the way for disintegration of India into various pieces, because the Sikhs, the Christians will obviously be concerned about this decision, and they will obviously be wary about this decision because this will make them feel vulnerable in their own homelands. The Sikhs are going to be charged with religious fervor, and their Khalistan movement, I'm sure, will get more momentum after this verdict. Like the Manipur Christians of India, of the Manipur state, now demanded that they have declared independence from India and they should be recognized by the countries around the world as an independent state. And we Muslims of Bangladesh wholeheartedly support their claim for independent Manipur of state of India, because Hindu fanatics have been carrying out atrocities against Christians in many parts of northeast India. Sikkim, for example, was taken over by India on the basis of an orchestrated coup, which turned Sikkim into a state which was predominantly Buddhist, into a state where Hindus and Buddhists are almost of equal numbers. So this proves that there is an agenda to turn India into a Hindu state, which was not in fact the case during the 1947 partition of India, because these ultra-nationalist Hindutva leaders were silent when it came to Indian leader Gandhi claiming that India would remain united because India was a secular nation. And that, in fact, that secular stance of Gandhi helped India in 1947 from breaking up into more parts. But obviously, you know what happened to Gandhi. Gandhi was killed by a Hindu nationalist. So I'm pretty sure the hate can unite ultra-nationalist Hindus for a while. But eventually, this verdict is going to send a message to all the religious minorities of India to wake up and demand separate lands to safeguard their own religious interests. Thank you for listening.